The signal was faint at first, a mere ripple in the static of the universe. But humanity's top engineers, working under the directives of Earth's Galactic Exploration Council, detected something more. A rhythmic pattern, too complex to be natural, emanated from the heart of the Forbidden Zone, a place no ship had dared to enter for centuries. As soon as the discovery was made, it sent a shockwave through the scientific community and the highest echelons of Earth's government. The Forbidden Zone was a rift, an impenetrable area of space that had been cordoned off, a warning to all that ventured too close. Do not trespass. Many believed it to be a natural anomaly, a remnant of a war fought between long-forgotten alien civilizations. Some thought it was a cosmic graveyard, a place where entire fleets of ships had vanished without a trace. But the signal changed everything. "Captain Rhodes, you're being assigned to the mission." General Seth Larson's voice was clear and commanding over the comms. "We need you and your team to investigate the signal. It could be the key to technologies we've only dreamed of. You're Earth's best chance to unlock what lies beyond the rift." Lyra Rhodes stood silently before the holographic projection, her dark eyes narrowing as the details of the mission were laid out before her. Her military career had been defined by the impossible, from leading ground forces on alien worlds to piloting humanity's most advanced starships through uncharted territories. Yet this felt different. This was unknown in a way no other mission had been. The data from the signal was sparse, almost as though whoever sent it didn't want to be found. What little they could decipher hinted at ancient technology, powerful enough to alter the very fabric of the galaxy. It was the kind of discovery that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. And to Lyra, it was an irresistible challenge. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her mind already thinking ahead. She had little more than a skeleton crew, scientists, engineers, a handful of elite soldiers, and one starship, the Ascendant, capable of breaking through the rift's powerful gravitational anomalies. "What do we know about the source of the signal?" Lyra asked, turning toward the holographic map that displayed the location of the Forbidden Zone. "What's waiting for us in there?" "Unknown," General Larson replied, his face grim. "That's why we need you. The signal has been dormant for centuries, but it's active now, and it's coming from the heart of the rift. We believe it's not a natural phenomenon, but something intelligent, something that's waiting for us." Lyra nodded, swallowing a knot in her throat. She could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. There would be no second chances. If this went wrong, humanity might lose its one shot at a legacy beyond Earth. But failure was not an option. She turned to her crew, a mixture of seasoned explorers and new faces eager to prove themselves. Among them was Dr. Elias Cortez, a brilliant but untested xenobiologist who had always been more comfortable with theories than action. Then there was Commander Jace Core, a battle-hardened veteran with a reputation for getting results when it counted, and Sergeant Murrah Vallon, a communications expert whose sharp wit was matched only by her skills in cyber warfare. Together, they were humanity's best hope. "We leave in 2 hours," Lyra declared, her voice cutting through the murmur of nervous anticipation. "Prepare yourselves. We're going into the Forbidden Zone, and I don't plan on failing." As the crew filed out to prepare for launch, Lyra stood alone for a moment, staring out into the vast expanse of space beyond. The stars seemed distant, almost unreachable, but within them lay a future that called to her. Humanity's future. And somewhere, in the dark expanse of the Forbidden Zone, there was an answer waiting to be found. But no one, least of all Lyra, could have predicted just how much that answer would change everything. The hum of the Ascendant's engines resonated through the hull, a steady pulse that seemed almost reassuring. Lyra stood at the command console, her fingers hovering over the controls, eyes locked on the holographic display of the Forbidden Zone, now looming just ahead. It was an ominous presence, a swirling black mass in the distance, stretching into the unknown. The deeper they traveled, the more the ship's sensors began to flicker and fade. Approaching the rift's outer boundary, Dr. Cortez's voice came over the comm, his tone heavy with the excitement of someone who had spent years studying theoretical anomalies, but had never once thought he'd stand at the precipice of one. We're entering an area of space that no ship has ever survived long enough to study. Lyra nodded without turning. She didn't need to see the trembling fear in his voice. She felt it in her own chest. The team was far from the relative safety of Earth, and there was no way back if the rift lived up to its reputation. As the Ascendant crossed the threshold, the stars around them began to lose their familiar shine, dimming as if a cosmic veil had descended over them. The lights on the ship flickered, and the viewports seemed to warp, as though the very fabric of space itself was twisting. It wasn't just the absence of stars. The darkness here felt alive. Commander Kor spoke up, his voice gravelly. "Captain, we're not receiving any readings from the external sensors. Everything's coming up blank. We're blind out here." Lyra bit her lip. "Continue scanning manually, Commander. We can't afford to get careless." Suddenly, the ship jerked violently, sending a wave of unease through the crew. The alarms blared, lights flashing red as the ship's artificial gravity systems sputtered, then recalibrated, leaving the crew in a floating suspension. Lyra's hand shot out to steady herself against the console, but the sudden lack of weight was only a brief distraction from the unsettling sensation that filled the air. "Report," Lyra barked. Sergeant Valen was at her station, her face pale as she rapidly typed commands into the system. "We've just passed a gravitational anomaly, Captain. It's throwing off our trajectory. No idea what it is, but it's huge. Whatever's causing it isn't showing up on any normal scans. Something's messing with the ship's systems." Lyra's heart raced, but she masked her concern. There was a reason they hadn't sent anyone into this part of space for centuries. Now it seemed the very laws of physics were being bent, warped in ways no one could predict. "Bring us out of this anomaly, Valen," she ordered. But just as quickly as the disturbance had started, it stopped. The ship's systems slowly returned to normal, the stars outside flickering back into view, though the rift itself remained an inky void. The crew, visibly shaken, but trying to maintain composure, resumed their stations. Lyra could feel the weight of the moment. There was no turning back now. They were deep in the rift, and the deeper they ventured, the greater the unknowns. "We'll need to set down and make sure the ship's systems are fully operational before we go any further," Lyra decided, turning toward the viewport again, where a strange, unnatural glow began to pulse in the distance. "Set course for that light source. Let's see if that's where the signal's coming from." "Understood, Captain," Valen replied, already typing commands into her console. The crew braced themselves as the Ascendant moved forward. Lyra's mind raced with possibilities, but one thought stood out. They were on the verge of something monumental. The Forbidden Zone had been sealed for a reason, and they were the first to breach it in millennia. The risk was enormous, but the potential reward was even greater. As they approached the glow, the ship was assaulted by a strange, resonating hum that echoed through the vessel like a sound wave. It wasn't coming from their systems. It was from somewhere deep within the rift itself. A pulse, a signal. "Captain, you need to see this," Dr. Cortez said, his voice unsteady. Lyra made her way to his station. On his screen, a blurry ancient structure began to form out of the darkness, a massive cylindrical tower covered in symbols and runes that seemed to shift and change the closer they got. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, an alien design that defied comprehension. "What in the universe is that?" Lyra whispered, staring in awe. I don't know, but I think that's where the signal's coming from," Cortez murmured. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. They had found something alive. The tower was not just a relic of a dead civilization. It was a gateway, and it seemed like it had been waiting for them. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the growing fear within. "Prepare for landing. We're about to find out what's inside." The rift had led them here, into the heart of the forbidden, and now it was time to face whatever secrets it held. The landing was tense, the hum of the Ascendant's engines the only sound that accompanied the crew's anxious breathing. Lyra's eyes remained fixed on the towering structure ahead, its surface now fully visible as they descended. The light from its core pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, casting eerie shadows on the jagged ground below. It was unlike any architecture humanity had ever encountered, angular, geometric, and yet somehow organic, as if it were both machine and living entity at once. As the ship touched down on the rift's unstable surface, the metallic groan of its landing gear filled the air, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the surrounding void. The ground below them seemed to ripple, as though the planet itself was barely holding together under the gravitational forces of the rift. Lyra steadied herself as the ship settled into place. "All right, everyone. This is it," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. "Suit up and be ready for anything. We don't know what we're dealing with, and we don't know what's inside. Keep comms open, and don't wander off. Understood?" "Understood, Captain," Commander Corps replied, his voice tinged with the familiar steadiness of someone who had faced impossible odds before. He was already checking his weaponry and gear, a careful and practiced motion that spoke of years of experience. Sergeant Valen, on the other hand, was already working at her console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she prepared the communications systems. "I'm patching through the external sensors now. Looks like we're not getting any response from the tower yet. Could be a sensor failure or something else." "Whatever it is," Lyra said, moving toward the airlock, "we're about to find out." The crew filed out of the airlock and onto the barren, rocky surface of the Forbidden Zone. The air was thin but breathable, and the temperature was colder than Lyra anticipated, uncomfortably so, like a distant winter chill that crept beneath her suit. They moved in silence, the eerie glow of the tower casting long shadows as they approached. Dr. Cortez walked beside her, his face tense but determined. His eyes were wide, scanning the alien structure with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The design is otherworldly," he murmured. "It's not just alien. It's advanced, far beyond anything we've seen before. It's like nothing we've encountered, even in the relics of ancient civilizations." "Stay focused, Dr. Cortez," Lyra replied, her voice sharp. "We're here to find answers, not admire the architecture." As they neared the base of the tower, something strange happened. The air around them seemed to hum with a subtle energy. Lyra could feel it, a pulse in the very atmosphere, like the tower itself was alive. Her fingers tingled, and for a brief moment the ground beneath her boots vibrated. The team halted, sensing the change. "Captain," Valen's voice crackled through their comms, "there's a shift in the tower's energy readings. It's like it's responding to us. Lyra stopped in her tracks. Her gaze turned back toward the towering structure. What do you mean responding? The ground trembled again, this time more violently, and the air grew heavier with a strange pressure. Suddenly, the base of the tower split open, as though the metal had liquefied and reshaped itself. From within, a low, guttural sound emerged, a sound that echoed deep into the rift. Everyone froze. The sound grew louder, and then a beam of light shot from the tower's core, striking the sky like a flare into the void. The light was blinding, pulsing in rapid succession, and it cast the entire surface in an unnatural glow. For a moment, it felt like time itself was stretching, bending, and warping around them. The crew shielded their eyes from the intensity of it. "Get back!" Lyra shouted, her heart racing. "It's not safe." But before they could retreat, the light abruptly stopped. The ground shook once more, and with a mechanical hiss, the tower's opening widened, revealing an intricate labyrinth of metallic and crystalline structures within. It was an invitation, or a challenge. "Captain," Cortez said, his voice filled with wonder and dread. That wasn't a malfunction. The tower's, it's active. It's waiting for us." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. This was no accidental discovery. Whoever, or whatever, had left the signal behind wanted them here, and now they had no choice but to step inside. She gave a final long look at her crew, noting the mix of fear and excitement on their faces. They had entered the forbidden zone for a reason, but now it seemed clear. The zone had no intention of letting them leave without unlocking its deepest secrets. "We move forward," Lyra commanded, her voice resolute. "Stay close and stay alert. We've crossed the threshold, and there's no turning back now." With that, they crossed the threshold into the unknown, stepping into the heart of the tower, into the heart of something far older and far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The air inside the tower was thick with a strange, pulsing energy, like the very walls were alive. As Lyra and her team entered, the narrow corridor ahead shimmered with a faint, ethereal glow, casting unsettling shadows across the jagged stone-like structures that lined the walls. It wasn't just light. They could feel it in the pit of their stomachs, a hum that seemed to resonate with their bodies. "Keep your distance from the walls," Lyra instructed quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might provoke the structure itself. The team followed in silence, their footsteps echoing on the uneven ground beneath them. The floor was smooth, but there were strange symbols etched into the surface, glowing faintly, as though they were written in an ancient language, long forgotten. "Captain," Cortez whispered, his voice awestruck. "This is beyond anything we could have imagined. It's alive. The entire structure feels like it's breathing, adapting to our presence." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she studied the dark expanse ahead. The further they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. There were no doors or visible exits, only an endless stretch of winding passages and open chambers, each more enigmatic than the last. The walls around them pulsed in time with the eerie hum, and strange symbols flickered into view as they passed by, shifting and changing before disappearing into the void. The deeper they went, the less their technology seemed to work. Communications were intermittent at best, and all external scans were met with complete failure. It was as if they were being swallowed by the rift itself, disconnected from the outside world. Lyra's gut told her that something in here was intentionally blocking their attempts to gather data. "Keep your guard up," Commander Kor said, his hand resting on the weapon at his side, his eyes scanning every shadow. "I've got a bad feeling about this place." Lyra nodded, but deep down she shared his unease. The tower's unnatural presence was unsettling, as if it were aware of their intrusion. The energy inside seemed to intensify the further they moved, as though the structure was responding to their actions, watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. Eventually, they entered a massive chamber, so large it seemed to stretch beyond the limits of their vision. At the center of the room stood an immense, crystalline structure, a monument to some forgotten power. The crystal pulsed with a bright, blinding light, radiating energy that caused the air to shimmer and distort. It looked like a heart, alive and beating in the center of the dark expanse. What is that?" Dr. Cortez asked, his voice filled with awe and fear. The crystal was unlike anything they had encountered before, far more advanced than any technology humanity had ever developed. It seemed to be composed of both organic and synthetic elements, its surface shifting between smooth glass-like clarity and jagged, shifting metallic edges. "I don't know," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "But it's no accident we're here. Whatever this thing is, it has been waiting for us." Without warning, the crystal emitted a loud, resonant hum, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the light from the crystal grew more intense, as though it were drawing energy from the very air around them. The symbols on the walls began to shift more rapidly, rearranging themselves in a complex pattern that made Lyra's head spin. "Captain," Valen shouted from the rear of the group, "the walls are moving. They're closing in." Lyra turned, her eyes wide with sudden alarm. The walls of the chamber were indeed shifting, slowly at first, then faster. Massive slabs of crystalline stone were gliding along the floor, closing off exits and trapping them in the center of the room. The air seemed to thicken, and the pulsing energy from the crystal grew louder, almost deafening. "We need to move, now," Lyra shouted. But before anyone could react, the crystal at the center of the room flared brightly, casting a brilliant white light across the entire chamber. It was as if the tower itself had come alive, its ancient consciousness awakening after centuries of dormancy. "It's scanning us," Cortez said, his voice trembling. "It's reading our every movement, every thought. We've triggered something far older than any of us could have imagined." The walls continued to close in, and the hum of the crystal grew louder, more insistent. The team looked around in panic, but there was nowhere to go. The path they had taken seemed to have disappeared, swallowed by the shifting walls. Suddenly the air crackled, and the ground beneath them began to vibrate with a force so powerful it knocked the crew off their feet. Lyra's vision blurred as the light from the crystal exploded in every direction, and for a moment it felt as though the entire tower was collapsing around them. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The light dimmed, the hum faded, and the walls ceased their movement. Lyra rose slowly to her feet, dazed but unhurt. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she surveyed the now-still chamber. What in the hell just happened? Cor asked, his voice rough from the sudden surge of adrenaline. "I think it was a test," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with awe. "The tower was trying to communicate with us, but I'm not sure it's finished yet." They all stood there, waiting for the next pulse, the next wave of energy, the next sign of what was to come. The crystal had spoken, but what had it said? What was its message? Lyra didn't know, but she was certain of one thing. Whatever was inside this tower was far more ancient and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the uneven breaths of the crew. The pulse from the crystal had subsided, but its lingering presence weighed heavily in the air. Lyra's mind raced. The event they had just witnessed was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The structure had almost seemed to test them, probing their very essence, but for what purpose? And why had it chosen now to awaken? "I don't like this," Cor said, voice low, as he scanned the room for any sign of movement. "There's something off about this place. It's like we're intruders in a forbidden tomb." "I agree," Valen added, her eyes narrowed, still watching the shifting walls with suspicion. "This isn't just a test. It's preparing us for something. But what?" Lyra raised a hand, signaling the team to fall back. The last thing she wanted was to give in to panic, but they needed answers. "We stay focused. We're not leaving here until we know exactly what's going on." As she spoke, Cortez was already moving closer to the crystal, his eyes wide with a mix of wonder and apprehension. He reached out, hesitated for a moment, and then placed his hand gently against the surface. For a long second, nothing happened. Then, a soft vibration echoed through the crystal, like the hum of distant voices, and the symbols on the walls seemed to shift once more, this time faster and more erratically. The walls around them flickered, showing fragmented visions. For a brief, terrifying moment, Lyra swore she saw a battlefield, an ancient war that spanned across galaxies, with ships clashing in a void of stars, their energy blasts lighting up the dark sky. A race of beings, tall, ethereal, and imposing, stood victorious amidst the destruction, their features like nothing human. "Cortez, step back," Lyra ordered, but it was too late. The crystal pulsed violently, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Cortez stumbled back, his face pale. He wiped his hand across his forehead, trying to steady himself, but his expression told everything. "I saw it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I saw them." The crew gathered around him, tension mounting in the air. "Who?" Lyra asked, her eyes sharp with urgency. "They weren't human," Cortez replied, struggling to catch his breath. "I don't know how to describe them. They were so advanced, so powerful. But they were fallen. They destroyed themselves." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Lyra's gaze was fixed on the crystal as it hummed again, this time softer, more deliberate, as though it were attempting to communicate. The images Cortez had described played out again on the walls, like a broken film reel of a forgotten past. The being's grandeur, their eventual downfall, and the quiet, creeping destruction of their world. "What is this place?" Valen finally spoke, her voice hushed. "A tome, a message." "It's both," Lyra answered, her mind racing to connect the dots. "This tower, it was built to preserve the memory of a civilization that reached its peak and then fell. But it's more than that. The crystal is alive. It knows what happened. And it wants us to understand. Or it wants us to suffer the same fate," Cor muttered, his eyes narrowing. This could be a warning. Lyra didn't know if he was right or wrong, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. Whatever this tower was, whatever had happened here, it wasn't just about ancient history. They were in a place where the past, present, and future seemed to converge, a place where the echoes of forgotten voices were calling them to uncover something far darker than any of them had imagined. "Dr. Cortez, what did you see in the visions?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. What else was there? Cortez closed his eyes as if trying to collect his thoughts, his hands shaking. The beings, they were called to something, a power greater than themselves. They thought they could control it. But in the end, it controlled them. It twisted their minds, their bodies, forced them to war against their own kind. And then they disappeared, left only these remnants behind. Control, Lyra muttered, piecing together the fragments. Something ancient, something powerful. We need to find out what it was, Valen said, and how we stop it from happening to us. Lyra nodded, turning back toward the central crystal. The air around them crackled with the promise of more revelations, but it was clear that the answers they sought would come at a cost. The rift they had entered, the Forbidden Zone, was not just a place of forgotten history. It was a place of warning, of prophecy. The crystal before them flared once more, brighter than before, and as it did, Lyra could feel a deep, unsettling presence stir within the tower. It wasn't just the energy. It was something far more ancient, far more alive. She stepped forward, determined. If we're to survive this, we have to uncover the truth, and we can't afford to wait any longer. The tower is awakening. Whatever it is, it's alive, and we need to know what it's trying to tell us before it's too late. With that, the team prepared to delve deeper into the heart of the tower, knowing full well that the past was not only alive, it was watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. The air had grown heavier and more oppressive, as if the tower itself was closing in around them. Lyra's every step seemed to reverberate in the stillness, but the whispers from the crystal grew louder, a chorus of distant voices that tugged at her mind, threatening to pull her into the abyss of their forgotten history. The walls seemed to pulse with each beat of her heart, resonating with the mysterious energy that hummed through the tower's veins. "We need to keep moving," Lyra said, her voice steady, but inside, her thoughts were a storm. The revelation that Cortez had witnessed, beings destroyed by their own ambition, haunted her. If the tower had once been the home of such an advanced, yet tragic civilization, what other horrors had it witnessed? And why had it chosen them to receive its messages? Dr. Cortez, still shaken by his experience, stood motionless for a moment longer, his gaze locked on the crystal. "This place, this whole tower, it's a warning," he murmured, his voice distant. "It's trying to tell us something, but it doesn't want us to understand it all at once. It's showing us only fragments." Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll have to piece it together." They pressed on, deeper into the tower, following the faint glow of the symbols that now pulsed with an almost rhythmic quality. With each step they took, the temperature dropped, and the light around them shifted, growing more muted and cold. There was something unnerving about the stillness here, a feeling that they weren't alone, that something or someone was watching their every move. As they passed through a narrow passage, the walls seemed to shimmer. Then, abruptly, the symbols on the walls formed into clear, readable patterns. They were no longer fragmented, as they had been before. It was as if the tower had decided to finally reveal its secrets. The floor beneath their feet rumbled softly, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a chamber larger than any they had seen so far. The room was filled with a vast, intricate array of alien machinery, suspended in the air, rotating slowly in perfect synchronicity. It was unlike any technology Lyra had encountered in her career. There were no wires, no visible connections, just floating geometric shapes and pulsating energy fields, each part of the machinery seamlessly working together as though part of a living organism. "The heart of the tower," Cor whispered, awe and trepidation in his voice. Lyra stepped forward, eyes narrowed, studying the chamber. The energy radiating from the machinery was palpable, and her pulse quickened as she realized that the power at the core of this place was immense, far beyond human comprehension. "This isn't just a structure," she murmured. "It's a vessel, a living vessel." The moment she spoke, the machines in the room hummed in response, their movements accelerating. The walls around them shifted, revealing more complex symbols that lit up across the chamber's surfaces. They were familiar, patterns they had seen before, but now they were aligned in a way that made Lyra's heart race. "I think it's reacting to us," Cortez said, his voice trembling. "This technology, it's sensing our presence. It knows we're here." Suddenly, the largest of the floating structures, a massive sphere, began to pulse more intensely. The entire chamber seemed to resonate with its energy, vibrating beneath their feet. Lyra could feel it deep in her bones. This was it, the moment when everything would change. Without warning, the sphere exploded into a burst of brilliant, blinding light. The team shielded their eyes, instinctively retreating. The light spread outward, wrapping around the chamber like a wave, and for a brief moment, Lyra thought she saw something in the heart of the light. Something massive, something ancient. Then the light faded, and what remained in the center of the room was a figure, a holographic projection, seemingly solid, but fading in and out of focus. It was a being unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Tall, graceful, and adorned in a strange, flowing armor that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Their face was obscured, but the form was undeniably alien, an otherworldly presence that radiated power, wisdom, and something darker beneath it all. The figure's voice, when it came, was not heard through their ears. It was felt deep within their minds. "You have come too far, human," the voice said, its tone calm, but filled with authority. "The path you walk is fraught with peril. You seek knowledge, but the price of that knowledge is steep. The fall of my people was not an accident. It was the consequence of our own arrogance. You risk repeating our mistakes." Lyra's heart raced as the words reverberated through her skull. There was no mistaking it now. The being before them was a remnant of the ancient civilization, the one whose technology had been left behind to warn the next species that dared to follow in their footsteps. "We have to know," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to understand what happened to you. What caused your fall?" The figure's form flickered, the energy within it pulsing as it seemed to study her. "You wish to understand. Then prepare yourselves, for the truth you seek is not one you can undo. The forces that destroyed us are not bound by time. They are eternal, and they will seek to claim you as they claimed us." With that, the figure's form began to dissolve, its voice fading into the hum of the chamber. As the last remnants of the projection disappeared, the room fell into an unnatural silence. Lyra stood frozen, her mind racing. The figure had given them a warning, but there was no way to know whether it was too late. They had been led deeper into the heart of the tower, and now the true nature of the danger they faced was becoming clear and far more terrifying. The price of knowledge had been set, and they were about to pay it. The silence that followed the hologram's departure was suffocating. Lyra stood frozen, her mind trying to process the weight of the warning that had just been delivered. The being's last words echoed in her thoughts. "The forces that destroyed us are not bound by time. They are eternal, and they will seek to claim you as they claimed us." Kor was the first to break the stillness. He stepped forward, his face a mask of determination. "We've come too far to turn back now. If this civilization's downfall was caused by something beyond their control, we need to understand what it was. We need to stop it from happening to us." Lyra nodded, though the unease gnawing at her insides threatened to overtake her resolve. "You're right," she said, her voice steady despite the growing sense of dread. "We can't turn back. We need to find out what these forces are, and how to stop them." As if in response to her words, the machinery in the room began to hum once again, its energy surging. The walls shifted, revealing new symbols. this time more intricate, more detailed than anything they had seen before. It was as if the tower itself was offering them a chance to learn more, to uncover the hidden truths that had been buried for millennia. Cortez approached one of the walls, his fingers tracing the symbols as though he could decipher their meaning just by touch. "There's something here," he muttered. "I think it's trying to show us a map, a guide to where it all started." "What do you mean?" Valen asked, her eyes narrowing. "It's showing us the origins of the fall," Cortez explained. "The beginning of the end for this civilization. If we follow this, we might understand what went wrong." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. This was what they had been searching for, answers, a way to prevent the same fate from befalling humanity. But as her eyes scanned the symbols, something gnawed at her. The path ahead wasn't clear. The more she looked, the more it felt as though they were being led into something far darker than they could have anticipated. "Do you think it's safe to follow this?" Lyra asked, her voice laced with caution. The warning was clear. We may not be prepared for what we'll find. "We don't have a choice," Cor said firmly, meeting her gaze. "We have to see this through. If this is the only way to stop whatever destroyed them, then we follow it. No matter what it costs." Lyra hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She had always believed in the pursuit of knowledge, in pushing boundaries to unlock the secrets of the universe. But this place, the Forbidden Zone, was different. The stakes were higher. The risks were greater. "All right," she said at last. "We follow the map, but we stay alert. Whatever happened here, it's not over." They moved deeper into the tower, following the path that the symbols outlined. The walls seemed to close in around them as they ventured further into the bowels of the structure. The air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier, as if the tower itself were becoming more hostile. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the whispers that had once been distant were now right on the edge of their hearing. Lyra could swear she heard voices calling to her, murmuring incomprehensible words that stirred something deep within her soul. "Do you hear that?" Valen asked, her voice tense. "The voices." Lyra's eyes flicked to the others. "It's not just you," she said, her voice low. "I hear them too. They're everywhere." The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like the very air around them was alive with the echoes of the past. Lyra's pulse quickened as the walls around them began to shift again. This time, it wasn't just symbols. It was images, scenes from another time, flashing before their eyes. The images were of a sprawling city, glowing with advanced technology, its towering spires reaching into the sky. People, beings, moving with a grace that defied human form, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. But the images twisted, warping into something darker. A cataclysmic event. A wave of destruction tearing through the city, leaving only ruin in its wake. The beings, their once bright eyes now hollow, driven mad by something unseen, something that had consumed them. The final image was of a massive rift in the fabric of reality, a tear in space and time that had torn through the city like a wound. Lyra felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the rift pulsed with a sickly, unnatural energy. This was the force that had destroyed them. It was the same force that had warmed them. The force that was now awake. "We're too late," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. "It's already here." And with that realization, the ground beneath them trembled. The tower was no longer simply a relic of the past. It was a gateway that had been waiting for the right moment to open, to release what had been sealed away for so long. The darkness was coming, and there was no way to stop it. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet, a low, rumbling growl that reverberated through the very walls of the tower. Lyra's breath caught in her throat, the weight of their discovery settling heavily upon her. The rift in reality, the force that had obliterated the ancient civilization, was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was waking up. "We need to get out," Cor shouted, his voice urgent, his eyes wide with panic. The floor beneath them cracked, and a gust of freezing wind howled through the chamber, rattling the walls. But Lyra's legs felt heavy, as though her body was frozen to the ground, her mind racing to comprehend the magnitude of what was unfolding. The images they had seen, those final moments of the lost civilization, were now too real. The rift, the madness, the destruction. It was all unfolding again, and they were at the epicenter. "No," Lyra said, shaking her head with newfound resolve. "We can't run. We have to stop it. We can't let this happen again." Valen grabbed her arm, her grip firm. "Lyra, you're not thinking straight. Whatever that force is, it's beyond anything we faced. It's too dangerous." "I know," Lyra replied, her voice a mixture of determination and fear. "But if we don't stop it here, if we leave now, it will spread. It will destroy everything. We've come too far to turn back." Cortez, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face pale but focused. "Lyra's right. We're not just dealing with an ancient weapon or a rogue entity. This is something more, something that transcends space and time. We need to find a way to close the rift before it consumes everything." The air around them began to shift, warping and distorting as the rift pulsed with an unnatural energy. The walls glowed with a sickly hue, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend. The whispers from before had become deafening, a cacophony of voices, disembodied and frantic, shouting warnings in languages that Lyra couldn't understand. But one message was clear: do not open the rift. The ground cracked open in front of them, and a vortex of swirling energy erupted from the center of the chamber. The sky itself seemed to split open, revealing a vast, black void beyond. It was a rift, a tear in the universe that reached deep into the unknown, a path to something unspeakable. Lyra's heart raced as she took a step forward, her eyes locked on the vortex. "It's trying to pull us in. It's trying to consume us. We can't let it." Cor yelled, but even his voice seemed to falter in the face of such overwhelming power. In the midst of the chaos, Cortez's eyes locked onto something. An ancient control panel, embedded into the wall beside the rift. "There," he shouted. "It's a way to stabilize the rift. We can close it, but we need to act fast." Without hesitation, Lyra sprinted toward the panel, the others following close behind. The floor trembled beneath them, threatening to collapse into the abyss as the energy from the rift grew more intense. But they had no choice. They had to try. Lyra reached the panel, her fingers trembling as she accessed the interface. The symbols on the screen were alien, but there was a pattern to them, one that matched the ones they had seen earlier. She input the sequence as quickly as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. The panel hummed to life, and a brilliant light surged from it, bathing the room in a blinding glow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden deafening roar, the rift began to close. The ground shook violently, and the air seemed to vibrate with the force of it. Lyra's body was thrown back as the vortex fought to maintain its hold, its tendrils of darkness reaching out, grasping at anything it could pull into its depths. "Stay with me," Lyra shouted, her voice strained as she fought to maintain control of the panel. She could feel the pull of the rift, the overwhelming force of it, but she refused to let go. The light from the panel intensified, and the rift began to shrink, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Then, with a final deafening crack, the rift closed, leaving nothing but a lingering silence. The room fell still, the tremors fading, and the oppressive energy that had hung in the air dissipated. Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, her body drained from the effort. "We did it," Cortez whispered, his voice barely audible. But Lyra wasn't sure. The rift had been closed, but the damage it had caused, the destruction it had unleashed, would never be undone. They had stopped it from spreading for now. But how long would it be before another rift appeared? And would humanity be prepared for what came next? "We've won the battle," she said softly, "but the war is far from over." As the others gathered around her, the weight of the truth settled in. The Forbidden Zone had shown them the future, and the consequences of tampering with forces beyond their understanding. The knowledge they had uncovered was both a gift and a curse, and they could no longer turn away from it. The tower had given them its answer. Now, it was up to them to ensure that humanity didn't repeat the mistakes of the past. The darkness was gone, for now, but the reckoning had only just begun.